Hello everyone. I want to take a few seconds to let you all know that the Teyvat Historia Discord server is now live. You can find a link to it in this video's description. Once you're there, take a moment to review the rules and select a role that best suits you. After that, you're free to converse in this new community, and to those of you who have already joined, thank you so much for all of your amazing support thus far. When I started this channel, I never really allowed myself to think that I'd even have a chance to reach 10,000 subscribers and then expanding Teyvat Historia into its own sub-community. But now that we've reached that milestone, I've got my eyes set on providing more lore, theory, and mechanics videos to make sure that you all continue to receive the type of content that you are most interested in. The new Discord will be a great way for me to let you all know what kind of projects I am currently working on, but also it has a request channel for you to let me know what kind of videos you would like to see in the future. But enough about that, let's get into why you're really here. I've gotten a lot of questions since the release of Genshin Impact regarding how I've built Mona. Today I'm going to share with you all of my findings from testing 3 different 4-star weapons on Mona, and which build I found to be the highest damage producer. Additionally, I'm confident that most of Genshin Impact's mages will also benefit from this build as a result of their high output normal attacks. So, without further delay, let's get into it. We'll start with 4-star weapon recommendations. Some of you may remember a couple of weeks ago I conducted a series of tests with the Eye of Perception against the Solar Pearl. The Solar Pearl with a crit rate build did outperform the Eye of Perception when it was utilizing a straight attack build, but the numbers were not so far apart as to render the builds based on straight attack and crit rate comparatively ineffective. Still, the Solar Pearl reigned supreme and is a better weapon option overall. Here you can see the average damage generated per 10 seconds, and for clarity, I've also converted it to a damage per second value as well. But I wasn't fully satisfied ending my tests here. The Royal Grimoire is available on the Star Glitter exchange for 24 Masterless Star Glitter. You can purchase up to 3 per month. At this point, I had already begun to maximize the effectiveness of my Solar Pearl build by changing my artifacts a bit to ones that utilize a good deal more critical damage. This resulted in a consistently higher output value when utilizing that weapon. I found that when comparing the Solar Pearl, when utilizing a setup of just better than 80% critical and around 70% crit damage, to a setup of roughly 120% crit damage and 67% critical rate, the damage numbers in the second build were significantly higher over time. While somewhat less consistent, it didn't appear to matter. Here you can see what the 10-second average output was, and what it came to as a DPS estimate. Now that I've explained which build functioned better for the Solar Pearl, I also had to do this for the Royal Grimoire, which yielded similar results. Through this, I was able to determine that it too performed better when utilizing a focus on critical damage. First, it is important to understand the weapon effect on the Royal Grimoire, which is called Focus. At base level, which is what I used for these tests, increased the character's crit rate by 8% up to 5 stacks until you've had a critical strike. For my purposes, Mona had a base 42.8 critical rate, which can be improved to a maximum of 82.8%. Next, I had to determine what the average critical rate was while utilizing this weapon, in order to figure out what the actual potential damage estimates came out to. This came out to an average of 62.4%. In this configuration, Mona had 1713 attack, 115.8% critical damage, 148% recharge, and 64.4 Hydro bonus. This resulted in an overall average damage over 10 seconds of 25,199 when utilizing normals only. This is an average damage estimate of 2,520 per second. Charged attacks maxed out at 6,411 damage, and the best hits from Stellaris Phantasm totaled to 30,184. For the Solar Pearl, using the same artifact build as mentioned before, Mona had 1,449 attack, a crit rate of 67.5%, crit damage still at 115.8%, recharge also still at 148, and Hydro bonus still at 64.4. This resulted in an average 10-second output of 24,673 damage when utilizing normal attacks, and a DPS value of 2,467. At first glance, this seems like a fairly even comparison. The difference is only 53 damage over 10 seconds. But when you start comparing the high-end crit numbers, you start to see a disparity. Solar Pearl's charged attacks maxed out at just 5,406, a difference of 1,005 damage. An Elemental Burst maxed out at 25,456, a difference of 4,728. With a difference in crit rate on average of only 5.1%, the stability in crit production seemed hardly worthwhile. And that shines true when looking again at the fact that the Royal Grimoire, even with a lower overall crit rate, outperforms the Solar Pearl in normal attacks slightly. As a final note with regard to the Royal Grimoire, As an advanced technique, you can, with a bit of practice, get comfortable with counting your non-critical hits to ensure that your elemental burst has a better chance of being delivered with a critical hit. This will help to ensure you get the best damage production. Overall, I feel extremely confident in recommending the Royal Grimoire to anyone who does not have a Skyward Atlas or a Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds, but still wishes to use characters like Mona, Klee, Ningguang, or Lisa as a main DPS role. Now we'll move on to talking about artifacts, and what the best options are. In these early days of Genshin Impact, it can be quite difficult to get artifacts that fully facilitate your goals. But with time, we'll find ourselves with better artifacts which will help us push the stats each character needs to perform at their best. For artifact set bonuses, which are comparatively easier to obtain than the perfect arrangement of substats in the early game, you will want any of the artifact sets that can produce 18% attack, as well as a Berserker 2-piece set for the 12% critical bonus. The best set for the attack 18% bonus is Gladiator, as you are able to obtain it in a 5-star variation, which can be raised to a higher level and will also yield higher substats. Additionally, it is also worth noting here that as you progress further into the game, you may find yourself in a position where you're able to reach satisfactorily high critical values without the use of a 2-piece critical set bonus. In that event, swapping it to artifacts such as Sojourner or Braveheart sets to obtain the additional 18% attack bonus will help you to continue to achieve higher output numbers. Now for the artifacts which can yield percent-based stat improvements, beginning with the Goblet. In my testing performed on Mona, I found that utilizing Hydro bonus damage percent as the primary stat on a Goblet will produce better output when compared to attack percent here. This should hold true with the rest of the roster's mages as well. The one downside to this is, if you are fighting enemies who are partially or fully resistant to Hydro, it will further reduce your effectiveness against that enemy. By contrast, it will do exactly the opposite of this when fighting enemies which are innately weak to the Hydro element, giving you an extra burst of effectiveness. Building attack will land you in the middle of this scenario, where Mona and any other major building will still have increased damage, but they will not shine as brightly against the element that they are intended to be strong against, and you will still be relatively ineffective against the enemies which resist that character's respective element. The exception to this is Ningguang, who is of course Geo. Geo elemental units are innately strong against other Geos, and as such, building into Geo bonus damage will only make them better against other Geo enemies. And since there are no known elements so far that directly resist Geo, you will not have much to lose at this time. That could, however, change in the future. Moving on to the Timepiece, there's nothing really of note here. You cannot get Hydro bonus damage in this slot, so you will want to stack up attack percentage here as a main stat to help ensure that you continue to push your general damage numbers as high as possible. Lastly, for the Circlet slot, this will depend on what weapon you are using. If you are using a weapon which increases attack stat alone, such as the Eye of Perception or the Skyward Atlas, which also has no impact on critical rate, I recommend using critical rate or straight attack in this artifact slot. If using the Solar Pearl, Royal Grimoire, or Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds, focus crit damage in this slot's main stat. If using the Windsith or Skyward Atlas, you will need to use an artifact which increases your critical rate here. This is to help you ensure that you maintain as close to a 2-to-1 ratio in critical damage to critical rate. The one exception to the rule here in regard to using a critical rate artifact in conjunction with the Windsith is if you already have an adequate amount of critical rate from your substats. Lastly, I'll talk a bit about the artifact substats themselves. In general, a good rule of thumb is to attempt to build the 2-to-1 ratio on crit damage to crit rate that I just spoke of. While growing a lead DPS mage such as Mona, you will want to also have attack percentage and energy recharge, as well as elemental mastery in the very late game. In the perfect world, you would have all of those substats on your artifacts immediately, but these things will in reality take time. For best results, find the best combination of these substats that you have access to while focusing on the main stats I mentioned before. Here is a final summary of my recommendations for 4-star weapons based on the testing I've conducted thus far. This build guide should also apply well to other mages on the roster if you are attempting to build them as your primary DPS. However, some characters shine brighter when built as a support as opposed to a primary DPS, such as Sucrose. If you have characters such as Mona already built as your primary DPS, you can extract further benefit from them by utilizing characters such as Klee, built as a modified secondary DPS with a non-standard focus on high critical rate. While it might lower her output potential slightly overall, compared to that of the 2-to-1 crit damage to crit rate build I recommended, it will unlock her potential once she has reached level 70 to recharge your team's elemental bursts faster, helping you keep Mona or any other chosen lead DPS popping off big numbers more frequently. This really helps in places like the Spiral Abyss or Domains. With that, I've reached the end of all I have to discuss in this build guide. If you found this video to be useful, please leave a like. While you're at it, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you're notified when my next video goes live. Thanks for watching Teyvat Historia. May the 7 guide you, travelers.